Dear friends, today we have the honor, the great honor and the pleasure to be with Professor James Galbraith, one of the most eminent representatives of Keynesian thought in economics. And Professor Galbraith has played an important role in the critique of the neoliberal theory of the Washington Consensus, and his ideas have influenced somehow some of the reactions of Western politicians after the 2008 crisis. Of course, they did not adopt them in whole. He is also a critique of the unending wars of the United States empire. He's a critical voice in economic science and economic theory and economic policy. And it's a very good opportunity to have him with us now when President Trump has unleashed his tariff storm and has created an unprecedented situation in the system of international relations and in world economy. Good morning or good evening, dear James.
Good morning or good morning.
Let's begin by what is happening now. What do you think that Mr. Trump is really doing? Because there are different interpretations of his policy. He himself says that the tariffs imposed on U.S. goods exported abroad are unjust, much superior to the United States tariffs, that he needs to make this policy in order to get United States reindustrialized and to also to get a better situation with the deficit of the enormous deficit the United States is running now. So are those the real motivations, and what will be the results anyway?
Yeah, I'm wary about ascribing motivations to an operation that is as inchoate as the Trump administration, or as, for that matter, almost any American administration is going to be characterized by multiple motives and multiple ideologies. In this case, we have the action, which was the sudden imposition, and then in many cases retreat from this very high tariff regime. And we can talk mainly about what the consequences are likely to be if the current situation continues. I'm particularly focused on the fact that what remains of the initial wave of tariffs, the most significant part of it, is a massive interruption in the trade flows between the United States and China. That we can bank on, and we can bank on it. I think continuing for the immediate future, and that's likely to have highly disruptive effects to the supply of a great many things that have been coming in routinely from China for American consumers. It is not going to. It is also going to interrupt and put an end, I suppose, to the flow of exports, such as they are, of certain kinds of goods from the United States to China. And adjustment to both of these phenomena is going to be slow and painful. There is a vision here that this is somehow going to lead to the return of factories to the United States. And it's exceedingly unlikely. And I think they basically recognize that. There are two kinds of factories that are at issue. The low-tech factories, which if they go anywhere from China, will not come to the United States, but they'll go someplace else, creating a bigger trade deficit between the United States and whatever other country it may be. And high-tech, globally integrated operations like Apple. which won't come back to the United States because they can't reproduce what they can do in China in the United States. So we're seeing a disruption rather than construction in this policy. But that's, I think, to be expected from a kind of one instrument sharp blow to an existing system. It would be the same. It was the same when Richard Nixon embarked on closed the gold window and imposed export restrictions and price controls in 1971, and it was the similar, maybe even closer to parallel with the Volcker shock in 1980-81, when interest rates were pushed up by 20%. The world economy was hit by a major shock. I would say the major difference is the United States is not as important now as it was in 1980. To the world economy, there's the center of gravity of world economic activity has shifted since then.
Yes, but you speak about a severe disruption, and it is obvious, of the trade between the economic relations in general between the two greatest economies of the world. This does not have also somehow a geopolitical part, because it seems like the Trump administration is trying to stop, so to say, China advancing more than it has been and become more and more a formidable competitor to the United States. What do you think about?
Well, that's certainly part of their objective, but that horse has long since fled the bar. The United States does not control the course of development in China, and so it's the Chinese will shake that off pretty easily, as they have done a series of efforts to curtail their improvement in advanced technology. You can see this in Huawei's adjustment to the shortage of the restrictions on the export of advanced chips, and you can see this in the introduction of DeepSeek as a competitor to much more expensive artificial intelligence systems. Generally speaking, the Chinese have the infrastructure and the capacity to do what they want. They have by far the world's largest internal market, with 4 times the population of the United States. And they have by far the world's largest science and engineering concentrations. So these areas which were areas where the U.S. had real leverage some years ago, it's not zero, but it's greatly reduced now.
But by the way, now I would like to open a parenthesis, because if I'm not mistaken, you have advised the Chinese government in the beginning of the 90s. And one question is why China has succeeded where Soviet Union has failed. What is the fundamental reason?
Well, that's an important historical question. And I was a technical advisor to the State Planning Commission on the United Nations project in the 1990s. It was basically a training mission rather than providing direct advice at a senior level to the Chinese government, but I got some exposure there. And what you can see, I think, clearly is that the Chinese, among other things, I mean, the Chinese solved a problem that the Soviets never solved, which was the problem of providing high quality consumer goods in quantity at low prices to their own population and to export markets. And the Soviets, they were constrained in various ways from even attempting to solve that problem. They had a much larger military sector. They're much larger. They were Cold War confrontational impasse with the West over many years. And they had a much more rigid planning structure. The Chinese had, to begin with, a substantially decentralized economy that was created, established already in Mao's time for national security reasons. And they were able to solve the quality problem, which was a classic problem of socialist economies, by importing standards from the West, essentially. I think that it was the fact that they knew they had to raise the quality of what they were producing in order to reach Western export markets that gave them the impetus to produce not only for those markets, but also in very large quantities for their own market. And that's been the distinctive feature, was a distinctive feature of that phase of Chinese economic development.
Yeah. Now the question is, by the way, do you think that we're increasing the ingredients to stay a little bit on the geopolitical, so to say, side of all that? Do you think that in the middle term we're facing an increased probability of a confrontation between Russia and China? Between the United States and China. I mean, of a military confrontation. Where do you think?
Do I think we're heading toward a military confrontation between China and the United States?
Yeah,
there's certainly a lot of talk about that. I am a deep skeptic of the likelihood of an open war between the U.S. and China, for the simple reason that the front line of such a war would be Taiwan. And I do just simply find it very difficult to believe that the Taiwanese will allow themselves to be placed in that position if it comes to that. They have managed it for 80 years. And they are, they're constantly under some pressure to provocations that are a feature, have been a feature of that scene for a long time. But at the end of the day, these two entities are closely intertwined. They have economic connections, family connections. They're very close to each other. They speak the same languages, and this is a situation where I would expect that before it comes to a shooting war, there will be a peaceful diplomatic settlement. I can't tell you what the contours of that settlement would be, but Hong Kong, Taiwan is not Hong Kong. It doesn't have the same connection to the British that Hong Kong had. And so this is something that as an alternative to a fratricidal war, which would clearly destroy Taiwan, a settlement of some kind seems to me entirely possible.
Yeah, but I agree with you. Simply, the Ukrainian experience of last years proves that some things which seem irrational can very well happen. But anyway, let's return.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the animosities that exist between part of the Ukrainian population and Russia. That's not a feature of the Taiwanese scene, I don't think. There isn't the Austro-Hungarian Empire and its cultural attitudes were never.
But let us return to the economic aspect of all that. Do you think that we are really running a risk of a serious recession because of those measures by President Trump?
Sorry, say that again. I didn't quite catch.
Do you think that we are running a risk of an international recession because of those measures by Trump?
I would put it this way, that the global economy and its very tight interconnections is vulnerable to shocks. It was vulnerable to the shock of COVID. It was vulnerable to the financial shock, and certainly vulnerable to this one. And so, I wouldn't say that what Trump's is doing is by any means unique, but it's of the same order, or maybe greater order of magnitude, actually, in terms of being able to take a system which has intrinsic fragilities and disrupt it. And that, not to draw elaborate examples, but when you break apart an integrated system, the first thing that happens is not adjustment, but a very sharp decline. When you broke apart Yugoslavia, you had a complete collapse of the integrated industrial networks that existed in that country, including the automobile industry. When the Soviet Union was broken apart, the industrial structure of the USSR simply imploded, and it took a decade before recovery even began. Now it's very far advanced for Russia, at least, but this is the way things go when you take an integrated system and try to reconfigure it. It's not something that happens easily, and at the global scale, there may not be instruments to make it happen at all.
Mm-hmm. How you judge the reaction of the Europeans to the measures by Trump?
The action of the Europeans? I'm not aware the Europeans have a coherent body of action. You want to point me in the direction of something that I can respond to? I mean, the Europeans are in a vulnerable position. They have greatly increased their own vulnerability by their conduct over the last 3 years in response to the war in Ukraine. They've cut themselves off from economically viable sources of energy that they previously had and were relying on, and replaced, and I speak of both Russian gas and nuclear power, and they have tried to replace that with sources of energy which don't turn out to be reliable or cheap. And as a result of that, they're already in rather serious trouble. And now they're discovering that the government of the United States is not especially interested in supporting the prosperity of Europe. So what do they do next? And they don't have either the administrative, or technical, or political capacity to respond to that in a coherent way, so far as I could see.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, but still they have the capacity to produce enormous rearmament projects, which I cannot understand what exactly is the aim of them. And it is quite strange nowadays that Europe will wants to shift so great amounts of money into defense planning for arms which cannot be used, or if used, they will lead to both the disaster of the Western and Eastern Europe, including.
Well, there are a number of issues here that I think are thoroughly unresolved. In order to have, if you thought an effective rearmament program was a necessity, the first thing you need is a central organization of that rearmament program. You can't really do it by parceling out the pieces to a lot of different national industrial structures. You have problems with compatibility. And one of the things that's happened, obviously, is that the NATO armaments industry has had product diversification because each country would like to have and protect so far as it's possible its own export markets. Now, what are they going to do? Are they going to create a Central European armaments sector? I don't think that's likely to be the outcome. Are they going to simply buy armaments from the United States? Well, I'm sure the Trump administration would like that very much, but again, I'm a little skeptical that that would be a sustainable politically, and it certainly wouldn't do any good to the European economies. Simply pour money into exports from America. So I find this to be, at least for the time being, let's just say, I'm a skeptic about whether this is something that will come to pass. And then there's the question of for what purpose? Why is it necessary? I mean, you have to seriously believe that the Russian Federation has got territorial ambitions against NATO, against the countries that are on the other side of that border. There's no serious
But
evidence of that.
there is a massive propaganda trying to persuade European citizens, and to some extent it is successful because there are no.
I would just suggest that maybe the first thing to do is to try a peace treaty and an agreement of non-interference in each other's affairs, and that would be it might conceivably work. It might turn out that the propaganda is just empty words, and that there really isn't any reason for Russia to attack NATO, nor for NATO to attack Russia. Why are we even contemplating this possibility? As you say, it's based upon some assertions about the political objectives of the other side, which are they're certainly far from being demonstrated, and of course they're actively denied by the policies and the diplomacy of the
Professor, there is a lot to be said as a critique to what Trump is doing in the United States and the European governments are doing in Europe. But what is the alternative? I mean, they are trying to respond to various challenges, maybe in their own way, but the challenges are there, and it is the erosion of the standard of life in Western societies. It is the formidable rise of foreign competitors like China or other South countries. So what should be the answer to the enormous trade deficit of the United States? What could be a different answer than the one Trump is trying to formulate?
Yeah, I want to be careful about just jumping in with an answer of my own to these problems, because I've been doing that for most of my career, and I've become kind of skeptical of easy answers. I can understand the frustration that many people feel who voted for Trump, and I can understand the reaction that we're going to do something dramatic, something has to be done. But almost any let's look at the reality here. If we had not started down this road in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the road of deindustrialization, financialization, and militarization of the American economy, we would be in a very different place. We'd have a much more balanced economy inside the country. We would have maintained, let's say, some of the great competences that existed in the, particularly centered in the industrial Midwest from the middle of the 20th century, and we would be substantially more resilient socially because the economy, the pillars of wealth on the two coasts, finance and insurance and so forth on the East Coast, and information technology on the West Coast, would not be so grossly out of proportion as they are with the basic conditions over much of the rest of the country. All that would be much better. But that was 45 years ago.
Yes.
This got underway. And for 45 years, we have gone down the road of integrating with the world economy and serving as the source of financial liquidity, and insisting on, and this I think the great mistake in the middle of the period, the start of the 20th century, insisting on flaunting military superiority with an endless series of wars against weak opponents, and in getting ourselves deeper and deeper into a commitment to essentially obsolete technologies that were now being shown to be exactly that. That is to say, worldwide network of bases, a global fleet of aircraft carrier strike groups, both of which are essentially vulnerable to the change of technologies in favor very fast missiles and precision targeting. And so here we are, very far out over our skis. And until we start thinking about what it is that we would have to give up and how to climb down from those things, I don't think there is an easy path forward. I think ultimately I would like to see an American economy that was not dominated to the same extent by private finance. And ultimately, I would like to see one with a much smaller burden, military burden, so that those resources, those real resources, could be reconstructed for purposes that were useful to the American civilian population. But if you just say we're going to put up tariffs and break off the existing supply chains and hope that that manufacturing will come rushing back while we continue to have to serve as the source of financial liquidity to the world on a unilateral basis, I don't think that's a realistic proposition. So I think the first thing to do is to make a coherent assessment of where we stand, and then think about a strategy. But then you run into a further problem, which is that thinking about strategies and implementing them in this country are two very different things, because we have, among other things, a 2- and 4-year election cycle. So when you start suffering the consequences of a change, the chances are that the other side, whoever is taking the opposite side of the argument, is going to take over the government, and so you never get a coherent strategy going forward. That leaves me with a rather bleak outlook, I have to say. But that I think it's better to be realistic than to constantly offer proposals that without at the same
yes,
time.
the problem is also
acknowledging how difficult it is to get anything done on this circumstances.
the problem is also that we don't see any serious social or political forces to uh, uh, to be able to propose an alternative vision, because an
No,
alternative.
that's true.
Hmm?
That's true. The Democratic Party has been for 30 or 40 years a free trade party with its financial base in the financial sector, as well as to some extent, to a large extent, out on the West Coast, so in the wealthiest parts of the country, and therefore, as an opposition to what Trump is doing, it can only basically say, don't do it. And that, of course, is not satisfactory to the forces that brought Trump in the first place. So rethinking this, the Democratic Party is a long way from its 20th century foundations in the Roosevelt New Deal, and in the construction of a state that could actually work to transform the economic structure of the country, which Roosevelt did. The New Deal had an enormous base in the building of a new infrastructure for an economy that would be based on oil and on electricity, initially hydropower and later on nuclear power. These things were laid down. They made it possible to build up the industrial base required to support the war effort, and they laid the foundation for the next 30 years.
But
how one goes about doing that again is not clear.
I'm wondering if a classical Keynesian shift is possible also in a situation of completely open international markets. I mean, if you increase the demand, for example, inside the country, it risks to go outside the country in present day conditions. So what part of Keynesianism is still relevant and what is not?
Well, I think there is a need for people who've read Keynes to let's just say revise their sense of how things work in view of the structure of the economy that we now have. And what we saw, actually, it was in the COVID pandemic, was that it's essentially flooding the country with money did relieve a great deal of hardship that might otherwise have occurred. And that was because most jobs are in the services sector. Most of them could be suspended for at least a significant period of time. But if you provided people with income to meet their basic needs, then they could get through it. But this is very different from the idea that you're going to provide a stimulus, for example, to industrial activity as a result of that kind of measure. The government has turned out to be quite good at providing income support and adjusted to some problems that it had, identifying the targets and so forth reasonably effectively. But again, that's not the same thing as the classic notion that you're going to, let's say, get business investment in manufacturing production to respond dramatically to an increase in the incomes that flow to households for precisely the reason you gave, that the sources of supply may well be outside.
But by the way, we see now a little bit a strange situation because with his tariffs policy, Mr. Trump seems to want to preserve neoliberalism as far as the internal structure of the country is concerned, but destroying one other basic asset, what is more or less the free trade. Already, of course, the free trade was somehow undermined with those tens of sanctions imposed on different countries, and but now we see a very strange system where they try to apply neoliberalism inside and some form of statism in international economic relations. What about this contradiction?
Sorry, say that again, because I'm not quite sure I got the drift of the question.
My question is the following. We have somehow the Trump and European governments are preserving, Western governments are preserving neoliberalism inside the countries, but Trump's tariff policy is somehow undermining neoliberalism as far as free trade is concerned. So we have a little bit of a strange system.
I'll offer a hypothetical interpretation of the ideological climate of this administration. It's clear that Trump, of course, is not a free trader, has never been, and believes in a national interest approach to economic policy, and that's there's nothing concealed about that. But when you look at the rest of the administration's policies, when you look at what they're doing to the federal government, you look what they're doing to the tax code, and you look, in fact, at also what they're proposing to do with the Pentagon budget, it's essentially unchanged from the dogmas of the Reagan era. It is a policy which says we're going to get rid of regulations, we're going to lower taxes, we're going to cut government spending, and they're even attempting to break the administrative consistency and effectiveness of Social Security, and no doubt they want to go after Medicaid. So this is Reagan's era libertarianism on steroids. It's a very familiar set of formulas that go back a long time. It's just that that it's divorced now from the international element of neoliberalism that really came in and became predominant, I would say, in the Clinton era and beyond. The Reagan policy was, and I remember this very well because I was executive director of the Joint Economic Committee at the time, and Democratic staff director. And we were in constant dialogue with the Reagan administration on ideological issues. And while they were ostensibly free trade, that was the Republican ideology of the day, they weren't, as a practical matter, free traders. They imposed quotas on Japanese automobile imports and did on steel. They did a number of other things which clearly indicated that they were politically realistic and nationalistic in important ways. And so the main difference there, I suppose, with Trump is that he's even more upfront about what he's doing, and he doesn't have he doesn't care about the ideological pretense in the way the Reagan people did. But on everything else that we're looking at, I don't think there's anything especially new, although I think it's given that the success of the Reagan administration in demolishing the New Deal was extremely limited. The guys who are in charge now are being much more aggressive about going after the core institutions.
So, dear professor, I would like to ask you how you see the future of BRICS and the future of dollar.
The future of the dollar?
And of the BRICS.
Of the BRICS, yes.
Yes.
Well, let me speak to the dollar. Obviously, in the last few days, we've seen what may be the first sign of a major move against the dollar, and that is something which has been in the works for a long time. I am, however, still skeptical that it will be that there will be a rapid transition away from U.S. Treasury bills and bonds as the major source of liquidity for the world, in spite of the best efforts, not only of this government but also the preceding one, to weaken the position of the dollar without intending to. In the Biden administration, the effect of the sanctions on Russia and other countries was to create essentially, of necessity, a zone of non-dollar transactions. And the Trump actions have precipitated a sell-off of U.S. Treasury bonds, at least for a few days. We'll see how it goes. That said, there's still an enormous amount of inertia in the dollar reserve system. There are trillions of dollars of U.S. Treasury bonds that are held outside the United States. And for the most part, those holding them are going to believe that at least the interest will be paid and the bonds will be rolled over when they come due. And it's quite hard to construct a synthetic alternative out of the instruments issued by other countries. So this gets to the BRICS question, which haven't had the same level of deficit, trade deficits over so many years, don't have the same amount of financial instruments circulating in the world market, and are themselves quite disparate in terms of their economies. And also, where the volumes of trade between the individual members of the BRICS are not necessarily that large as a share of world trade. So I'm inclined to think that, well, there's some fluctuation in the dollar system right now, that even if the United States really wanted to get out of it, to appreciate the dollar and embark on a real strategy of national self-sufficiency, that would be in line with what Trump wanted to do, and in fact with what Nixon wanted to do and achieved to some degree in 1971. It would be very, very difficult to make that stick over a long period of time. So I'm let's just say, I think the inertia of the existing system still has a lot is still the largest single argument in this space. It's most likely to continue.
Mm-hmm. But you recently it was published a book of yours by the University of Chicago Press, Entropy Economics, the living basis of value and production. I'm wondering why you have chosen a term from thermodynamics describing in the title of your book.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch your question.
Why did you use a term of taken from thermodynamics in a book related to economic theory?
Oh, okay, yes. Oh, thank you. Why use borrow a term from thermodynamics? Because the second law of thermodynamics is the most basic law of nature, and every discipline that examines the world has had to come to grips with it over the course of the last 150 years or so. The biology, physics, and almost all the social sciences except one, economics. What has economics done? Economics is stuck with a set of ideas that really date from classical Chinese philosophy through the end of the 18th century up till maybe the French Revolution, in which the fundamental notion was that things come into balance. And Marshall and the neoclassicals revived those ideas at the end of the 19th century with the supply and demand theory and theories of market clearing. And then it was reinforced with a lot of mathematical apparatus in the 20th century by Ken Arrow and Gerard Debreu. And this notion of competitive equilibrium has been kind of the touchstone of neoclassical economics. A lot of departures from that. You could say, well, markets aren't perfect, information isn't perfect, there are asymmetries, there's this and that. But that's the foundation of the structure of thought. And it simply doesn't come to grips with the fact and doesn't come into contact with the fact that all living systems, biological, mechanical, social, have to tap into high quality resources which have low entropy. To use those resources, the entropy rises as the course of doing that, and you get useful work and you get waste and you get dissipation of your original energy resources as that goes on. As a result of which, the concept of equilibrium, as economists use it, isn't a useful concept, and it gets you into policy errors and contradictions at every step of the way. And the book gives some examples of that, and I'm working on a manuscript that will give a great many more of them, so I can happily talk about that. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is to say there's some core concepts that economists ought to take as a point of departure, and those concepts are not the ones that neoclassical economics advances. To give you another very specific example, neoclassical economics basically says there are markets on one side and government on the other, and government's function may be to set a little bit of context for markets, but otherwise basically it's interfering, justifiably or not, in what markets do. And that's simply contrary to reality. In the real world, in any but the most primitive settings, and in fact even in those, markets don't exist without government. Government is what sets the framework for a market system. And that is done through mechanisms of law and regulation, which are largely for the most part, operate in a well-functioning society so smoothly that people don't even notice or certainly don't object to them. They condition their behavior and create a sense of trust that enables markets to function efficiently. And so, again, the hostility that free marketers show toward government is entirely contrary to what's necessary to make an actual economy function.
Yes, you put the question how an economy must function. But the leaders of the economy are putting another question, how they want, at least in our Western countries, how they will maximize their profits in the long run. And then I have the impression that they are favoring or inventing economic ideas which will be favorable to their goal. In the last decades, for instance, and especially in the European Union, I have the impression that we are witnessing a kind of regime change. I mean, especially the Maastricht Treaty is trying to substitute the principle of popular sovereignty, which was central in Western uh, political thinking, with various other principles like the domination of the market, the domination of the capital. They instituted even neoliberalism as a constitutionally imposed policy. So it seems like we are going from a world where of states, at least how to say, at least in theory, based on popular sovereignty, to states which are mere tools of market, that is, of big financial capital. And how this interaction between financial capital and state has evolved and is what has to be done with this?
Well, I mean, I think it is certainly possible to interpret the powerful ideological forces behind so-called free market ideology as essentially acting as cover, as a smokescreen for what is essentially predatory behavior, for dismantling structures that exist to regulate inequalities, to make the system function smoothly in the interest of a large part of the population, in order to essentially permit creaming off of valuable resources and assets for a much smaller group of people. That is essentially elite capture and predatory behavior. And we see this all the time. In fact, I wrote a book called The Predator State, describing how this operated in the United States, with the creation of new social welfare programs that were designed to provide the maximum enrichment of small numbers of political constituents. So this is, in fact, this book generalizes that principle and makes it quite clear what is going on. So it kind of strips away the notion that you can achieve let's say, the greater good of the greater number by the process of tearing down the regulatory structures that make markets work smoothly.
Mm-hmm. By the way, there is another question which is posed by the evolution of the ecological situation. Are we, there is a question if we can continue, some people at least put the question, if we can continue trying to develop indefinitely productive forces, or at least the industrial productive forces we used to develop and we still develop, in the light of some natural limits which we are approaching, if we have not already crossed. I mean, do you think that this model of eternal development of productive forces, or at least of industrial productive forces, is plausible in the long run, is viable? Or we have to imagine another kind of civilization?
Well, that's a challenging question. I'm going to put it this way: when you have access to high quality resources which you can extract with a substantial surplus, That's gas or oil or nuclear power or something else, then it pays to make large long-term investments to do just that. And that is what is the foundation of an efficient system that can deliver a large volume of goods at low cost to a large population. And the 20th century saw repeated, let's say, instances of the development of resources of that kind, and some of them are still coming online in certain parts of the world. But it would appear that the period of access to very large fresh volumes of high quality resources is coming to, let's say, I won't say coming to an end, but that it is not as promising as it was a century ago. A century ago, here in Texas, there was the discovery of vast reserves of easily accessible petroleum, which could form the basis of an economy based on roads and automobiles and trucks and airplanes and everything else. And there were large unexploited hydropower resources, which could form the basis of the electrification of the entire country. And the same thing drove the Soviet Union forward for a long period of time. Now, when you look at Europe, you say, okay, you've got a certain infrastructure, and it was based upon access to certain levels of resources, including, of course, the North Sea oil, which has been in decline for a long time, and on and on. And the answer is, how are you going to renew your cost advantage? And the answer to that is they have not figured it out. And they've been pursuing a certain amount of illusions, including the idea that they can cut themselves off from inexpensive and reliable Russian gas, or the idea that they can substitute wind and solar for other sources of energy. And they're going to find that that the systems that are in place don't operate profitably at high resource costs. And that is the basis of the current ongoing deindustrialization, for example, in Germany. I mean, 10 years ago, when I was involved in Greece, the economic power of Germany was beyond contest in Europe. And the situation has deteriorated quite dramatically since that time. And when you can see that happening. So we're calling attention to, let's say, two very fundamental aspects of the prospects for productive forces. And one of them, as I keep saying, is the availability of high quality resources. And the other one is the willingness to make long-term investments to take advantage and to lay the foundation, the infrastructure, if you like, the productive infrastructure to take advantage of those resources. And when you run into increased levels of uncertainty, increased levels of interest rates, and more erratic policy, to come back to Mr. Trump and his recent actions, you're not going to, that is not an environment which is going to encourage private sector businesses to undertake long-term investment commitments. And you can pick up the papers right now and read what the business leaders are saying. Are we going to invest simply because Trump has put on a tariff which he could take off in 3 weeks or 2 years, and where we know that he's not going to be president in 3.5 years, and the successor might or might not do these things? Why would we put out millions or billions of dollars in fresh investment in order to compete in a world economy where the conditions may well turn very much against us just by the whim of the policymaker in Washington? The answer is they won't. So the conditions for a kind of powerful path forward of the kind that we saw in the 20th century are very hard to envisage. And they may require, if they're possible at all, a comprehensive kind of resocialization of investment, as Keynes many years ago thought would be necessary. So that's where I think a hard-nosed assessment of the real economic situation comes out.
So what you say means maybe can be translated that we need a transition from a system ruled completely by the markets and with a short time range to a
Yeah,
kind of.
let me just elaborate on that point. Who's calling the shots and how is it laid out? I mean, another point that brings in thermodynamics to this picture is everything happens according to plans. There's no such thing as let's say the development at any level of any productive process that doesn't operate according to a plan. And at the biological level, the plans are encoded in genes. At the mechanical level, they're encoded in blueprints and architectural drawings and mechanical drawings and designs. And at the social level, it's habits and regulations and laws and constitutions, all of which evolve slowly over time. But it's all about working out a course of action according to some mechanism for planning. Things do not happen spontaneously as a result of amorphous actors coming together and bargaining in marketplaces. Even markets themselves are set up according to regulatory structures, and they won't exist, they'll fall apart otherwise. Then we say, is it possible to have a more or a less effective planning network? And the answer is yes. And what's the right mix of centralization and decentralization in effecting those plans? I think we can see that extreme centralization runs into serious problems. Extreme decentralization runs into serious problems. Somewhere in the middle is the right balance. And if you look over the course of the last 50 years, it seems to me pretty clear that that balance was first of all struck in the developing economies of East Asia, and then on a massive scale in China, which has a combination of central guidance and decentralized institutions and decision makers on a vast scale. And that it also characterizes where the Russian Federation has come out after the Soviet period of extreme centralization, and then the 1990s, where all of that fell apart and there was essentially no planning and a complete chaos. And they came back and have developed a system in which you have a state, you have parastatal enterprises, you have private enterprises, and you have a certain division of labor and a certain common direction. And people seem to know what they're doing. And that is the way in which a society comes to grips with the existential problem of working its resource base in the most effective way, in a way that gives you some stability and some hope for the future. And you're not doing that, don't expect to have a good result.
So I can, maybe you will agree with the note that if we compare the Chinese, how to say, exponential growth to the more or less stagnation of the West during 2 or 3 decades, this is a historical proof of the superiority of some kind of planning system in economy to the neoliberal ideas. It seems
planning for a larger purpose here. Who has been making the decisions in the Western world economy for the last 30 or 40 years? The answer is the financial sector has been making most of them. It has put waves of resources into some very narrow sectors in information technology and so forth. It has allowed the public infrastructure to deteriorate to an extraordinary degree. And it has been made a mess of the energy sector, as we can see. And I would argue that because of the Confederate character, essentially, and the extreme ordoliberalism of the European Union, that the European situation has been even worse than that in the United States. And that the U.S. does have a federal government. It has institutions that were built up in the New Deal and strengthened in the Great Society period, Kennedy and Johnson, and that still exists, and that still operate with a certain degree of efficiency, at least up until the last few weeks, when a serious effort to demolish them. But in the European case, the welfare states that were built up at the national level from the 40s into the 60s and 70s have been under terrific assault for the last 50 years, and the whole structure of the European Union is hostile to them. And so you end up with a kind of let's say, the breakdown of the national institutions under the pressure of a multinational entity that does not function on the same principles, and that's a big problem for Europe.
By the way, as you speak about Donald Trump, what do you think his intention? What he tries to do with the state in America? What he wants to do? To destroy the state, to create a much smaller state, a more obedient state? What is the essence of his policies? If we can
I
have
don't know.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know that Trump has articulated his own vision of the American state. What he has said in public is consistent with the rather extreme libertarianism of some of the people around him. And it's clear that a guy like Elon Musk has got extremely nihilistic attitudes toward, and is willing to say all kinds of make extraordinary false claims in order to discredit or to attack Social Security and other institutions which have been functioning rather well in the United States. And so I find this, let's just say, the inconsistency between what Trump claims he wants to do to improve the living standard for Americans generally and to improve the productive structure of the country, and the measures that his people are taking is very striking. It's very striking because they're really tearing down those remaining institutions that continue to function, while taking measures that will not lead to a reconstruction of the industrial system that existed, that they look back to with such fondness. So we're in a period where you really can't say that there is such a thing as a coherent vision about the future of the United States.
But after all, behind Donald Trump, there are concrete social forces, economic forces, which are supporting him.
Well, there are two broad forces behind Trump. His electorate, which is his appeal was to the let's say the broad heartland of a population which feels left out, and legitimately feels left out of the very narrow sources of high prosperity in the United States in the last 30 or 40 years. Whereas the Democratic Party was exactly rooted in those urban professional classes, and with its funding bases in Wall Street and the information technology industry. And then you have very powerful places right around the president controlling policy, a group of libertarian billionaires who have, let's just say, very strongly held and very radical convictions.
You mean Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, etc.?
Yeah, sure. And these are it's very strange to me that they would operate as they are doing, and it may be simply that they just want to tear it down in order for personal profit. Although when you already have several $100 billion in your portfolio, what the point of that is not entirely clear.
Mm-hmm. Before, when I asked you about the development of productive forces, I had also in mind the ecological limits of this development. I mean, one thing is the availability, the planning, how to extract them, how to use them, things like that. The other question is that we are probably crossing the natural limits of the Earth system. So how we can affront this challenge, even if there is the best planning?
Yeah, I have no good answer to that question. I don't believe we have a system that's designed to take account of the ecological limits in a coherent way. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of subsidies thrown at additional sources of energy, particularly the so-called old energy sector, which has not repealed Jevons law, which explains that all sources of energy continue to be used more intensively as you add new ones, and that so that we have not reduced the carbon footprint of the economy, and a lot of what is being added to capacity is going for new uses like data centers and artificial intelligence and some Bitcoin mining. So we're seeing here an exercise that I think has a large element of self delusion about it. I'm not optimistic. I understand that there are ecological limits, but I don't think we're going to deal with them that way. Ultimately, I have the very pessimistic view that the human footprint on the planet will be reduced through the decisions of millions of households to have fewer and fewer children, which we're already seeing. And ultimately, toward the end of this century, that will lead to a peak and then a decline in the human population. By that time, a lot of ecological change will have already occurred. And we'll just have to live with it, in my view. I don't want to be, and I think that's basically the realistic assessment. And that's what we say in our book.
Okay, I hope you are too pessimist and you will not be confirmed. But because there are also people who believe that with artificial intelligence, we are going to see a fundamental change also in the human condition, or even a transformation of the human being. But anyway, this can be a subject for another interview. Thank you very much.
This would require a level of first of all, engineering capacity and transformational ability and planning for which there's no evidence. I mean, what one saw in the Biden administration in the U.S. was, as I say, a set of subsidies to support the addition, for example, of solar and wind power installations. And one of the difficulties of that is that you then have to manage an extremely complex problem of managing the grid. You have to collect, rather than having central and highly efficient generation of power, which is then distributed. You have a very dispersed collection of energy, which then has to be collected and redistributed. It's a very complex problem. It's a very complex problem, and I don't think it's one that's been solved on a systematic basis. I don't believe anywhere. Maybe a little bit. They may be making some progress in China on this, but I don't think we're very far along.
Thank you very much, John, for this very interesting tour d'horizon. And I suggest to our viewers who want to learn more about your ideas to read your book, Entropy, the Living Basis of Value and Production. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great to talk to you, Jimmy.